any other evening. I just finished my workout at the gym. A grueling session meant to help me de-stress after a day of back-to-back meetings. I wasn't looking for excitement or confrontation. All I wanted was a hot shower, a simple dinner, and maybe a quiet hour on the couch to catch my breath. But life, as it turns out, had other plans. When I walked through the door, the faint scent of lavender greeted me. It wasn't the cheap kind, either. This was sophisticated, the kind Amanda would pick up during one of her rare but extravagant shopping trips downtown. I shrugged it off at first, chalking it up to her penchant for aesthetics. There she was, standing in the kitchen. Her back was to me, her silhouette bathed in the soft, golden glow of the pendant light above the counter. A glass of red wine sat in her hand. Merlot, if I had to guess. Amanda always had expensive taste, especially when it came to her wine. The candle burning on the table next to her added a strange sense of intimacy to the scene, as though she were hosting some private moment I just stumbled into. "Hey!" I called out, my voice casual. My duffel bag slipped off my shoulder and landed on the floor with a dull thud. She turned to me, her smile so wide it seemed unnatural. It didn't quite reach her eyes, though. That was my first clue. Subtle, yes, but unmistakable to someone who had spent years memorizing every inch of her face. "Hey, Nate," she said, her voice light, almost too light. "Good workout." I nodded, walking over to the kitchen island where she stood. "Yeah. What's all this?" I gestured at the scene. The wine, the candle, the oddly curated air of sophistication. "Oh, this." Amanda laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Just treating myself. It's been a long week." Her explanation didn't feel off at the moment. Amanda worked in event planning, a career that demanded constant precision and charm. Stress came with the territory, so unwinding with wine and candles wasn't entirely unusual. Still, something lingered in the back of my mind, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. "Fair enough," I said, heading toward the fridge for water. She moved smoothly around the kitchen, more animated than usual, almost bubbly. Normally, she'd be curled up on the couch by now, scrolling through her phone or half watching a reality show. This was different, but I ignored it. Maybe she really did just need to let off some steam. "How was your day?" she asked, pouring herself another glass of wine before I'd even answered. "Busy," I replied. "Same old stuff. Meetings, emails, deadlines." "You?" "Oh, the usual," she said, her tone breezy. "A lot of last-minute changes for a client's gala next weekend. Nothing I couldn't handle." Her words were casual, but the way she avoided eye contact as she spoke sent a tiny ripple of doubt through me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was off. I decided not to press her. Amanda leaned against the counter, sipping her wine and making small talk about work, friends, and weekend plans. It should have felt normal, comfortable even, but every sentence seemed to have an invisible weight behind it, as if she were trying too hard to keep things light. Eventually, I grabbed a bottle of water and excused myself to the shower, chalking up my unease to post-workout fatigue. But as the hot water poured over me, my mind wandered. I replayed the scene in the kitchen, trying to figure out why it had unsettled me. Was I imagining things? Was I just projecting my own exhaustion onto her? By the time I finished my shower and returned to the kitchen, Amanda was on the couch, her wine glass nearly empty, and her phone in hand. She glanced up briefly and smiled, the same wide, practiced smile from earlier. "Feel better?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. We watched TV together for a while, but the distance between us felt like an unspoken chasm. I caught her glancing at her phone more than usual, her thumb swiping across the screen before locking it and setting it down, always face down. The doubt in my chest grew heavier. Something wasn't right. After my shower, I settled onto the couch across from Amanda. The air felt lighter now, less intense than earlier, but there was still something in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me fully relax. I grabbed the remote and scrolled aimlessly through channels while Amanda sat with her wine, her gaze fixed on her phone. She hadn't looked up in minutes, completely absorbed by whatever was on the screen. "How was your day?" I asked casually, breaking the silence. She murmured, not lifting her eyes. "Your day," I repeated. "You said it was busy earlier. Anything interesting happen?" She hesitated just for a beat. Normally, Amanda was quick to respond, diving into details about her clients' ridiculous demands or the drama from her office. But now her reply was sluggish, almost distracted. "Oh, she said finally, glancing up briefly. "Just the usual chaos. You know how it is." She didn't elaborate, which was odd. I waited for her to say more, but she had already shifted her attention back to her phone. Her thumb moved quickly across the screen, scrolling, typing, and scrolling again. "What's so interesting?" I asked, nodding toward her phone. She smiled faintly, locking the screen and setting the phone face down on the coffee table. "Just catching up on some emails. A client needed some last-minute details ironed out for the gala next week." "Nothing exciting." I nodded, trying to convince myself there was no reason to feel uneasy. Amanda was always busy. Her clients were demanding, her schedule erratic. This wasn't unusual. And yet, that faint nagging feeling in my chest remained. I reached for the remote, flicking through channels again in an attempt to ignore the discomfort. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her phone light up. The notification was quick, disappearing almost as soon as it had appeared, but not before I caught a glimpse of the name. Nate. My stomach tightened. I'd heard the name before. Amanda had mentioned Nate in passing a few times, something about him being a new hire at her company. He was part of her team, she'd said, someone she worked closely with on a few major accounts. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Amanda worked with plenty of people, and she often brought up her coworkers when she recapped her day. But now, seeing his name pop up on her phone, something felt different. "Who's Nate?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Her head snapped up, her expression neutral but her eyes just a touch sharper than usual. "What?" "I saw a notification pop up on your phone," I said, gesturing toward the coffee table. "It said something about Nate. Isn't he the new guy from your office?" "Oh yeah," she said quickly, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. "Nate's just a coworker. We've been working together on the gala project I mentioned. He's been a huge help, actually. Super on top of things." Her explanation seemed reasonable enough, but there was a slight edge to her voice, as though she was choosing her words carefully. I didn't press her, though the unease in my chest grew heavier. "That's good," I said, trying to sound indifferent. "Glad he's pulling his weight." She nodded, picking up her phone again and unlocking it with a quick flick of her thumb. The screen lit up, and she began typing rapidly, her wine glass untouched on the table beside her. For the next half hour, I tried to focus on the TV, but my attention kept drifting back to Amanda. She seemed more engaged with her phone than with anything else, her fingers moving across the screen with an urgency that didn't match the laid-back vibe she was trying to project. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. It wasn't just her distraction or the way she seemed to guard her phone more than usual. It was the look in her eyes when I mentioned Nate. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking it. But that strange feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. Amanda announced she was heading to bed earlier than usual, a yawn punctuating her statement. She stretched her arms and gathered her wine glass, glancing at me with what I could only describe as practiced nonchalance. "I'm exhausted," she said, her tone light. "It's been such a long day. I'm going to crash." I nodded, offering a small smile. "All right, sleep well." She leaned down and kissed me on the cheek, lingering just long enough for it to feel normal but pulling away too quickly for it to feel genuine. As she disappeared up the stairs, I listened to the soft creak of the floorboards, each step growing fainter until I heard the bedroom door click shut. Left alone in the quiet of the living room, I tried to focus on the show playing on the screen. But the faint glow of Amanda's phone on the coffee table kept drawing my attention. She'd left it behind, a rare occurrence. Usually, she took it with her everywhere, even to bed. I told myself to leave it alone. Picking up her phone, snooping through her private messages. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing. It felt wrong, invasive, and yet, the nagging feeling in my chest refused to go away. Something didn't add up. The guarded way she spoke. The way her eyes darted away when I mentioned Nate. The way her phone seemed to buzz just a little too often lately. It all swirled together into a storm of doubt I couldn't ignore. Before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for her phone. The screen lit up, revealing a familiar lock screen. A photo of us from a vacation a few years ago, smiling on a beach at sunset. The sight of it made my chest tighten. Her phone was locked, of course, but Amanda was nothing if not predictable. After a moment's hesitation, I typed in the code I'd seen her use countless times. Our anniversary. The screen unlocked with a soft click. I stared at it for a moment, my heart pounding. Part of me still wanted to back out, to put the phone down and pretend I hadn't just crossed a line. But another part of me, the part that had been on edge all night, needed answers. I opened her messages. First, everything looked normal. There were conversations with coworkers, friends, her mom. The usual chatter, work deadlines, weekend plans, a recipe someone had shared. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief, like maybe I was overthinking everything. And then I saw it. A thread with a contact labeled only as N. My chest tightened as I opened the conversation. The messages started off innocently enough, work-related exchanges, reminders about meetings, and jokes about clients. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. Can't wait for Friday. Last night was amazing. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, my mind scrambling to make sense of them. Last night? What had happened last night? I thought back, trying to remember anything unusual, but nothing came to mind. There were more messages, each one a little more intimate than the last. I've been thinking about you all day. You make everything feel so much better. The words blurred together as my heart pounded in my chest. I scrolled faster, searching for something that would confirm or deny what I was beginning to fear. The thread was peppered with emojis, winking faces, hearts, the kind of shorthand intimacy I thought Amanda reserved only for me. I set the phone down on the coffee table, my hands trembling. My mind raced, a chaotic jumble of disbelief, anger, and betrayal. This couldn't be real. There had to be some kind of explanation, some context I was missing. Amanda wouldn't do this. But deep down, I knew. I knew what I had just seen. Upstairs, the house was quiet. The faint hum of the heater and the distant sound of Amanda's soft breathing were the only noises in the stillness. I sat there in the dark, the weight of the messages pressing down on me like a heavy stone. For the first time, I felt like I was looking at my life from the outside, like a stranger peering into a window, watching a story unfold that I had no control over. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Sleep had been elusive, and what little rest I managed to get was fractured by restless thoughts. The messages I'd read the night before replayed in my mind like a broken record. Amanda moved around the house as if nothing had happened, humming softly as she made coffee, scrolling through her phone, and occasionally glancing at me with the same practiced smile I'd seen countless times. It was infuriating, her calm, as though everything was fine. But I knew better now. Once she left for work, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my own phone. I needed answers, real, undeniable proof of what was going on. That was when I thought of Zach. We'd been close in college but drifted apart over the years, only keeping in touch occasionally. Zach had since built a reputation as a private investigator, specializing in cases exactly like this. I hesitated, my finger hovering over his name in my contacts. Calling him would make it real, taking this from suspicion to full-blown investigation. Was I ready for that? Did I even want to know? I pressed the button before I could talk myself out of it. Nate? Zach's voice was groggy, as if I'd woken him. Yeah, it's me, I said. Sorry to bother you, but I need your help. Help with what? He sounded more awake now, his tone shifting from casual to professional. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. It's Amanda. I think she's seeing someone else. Zach was quiet on the other end of the line, but I could hear him shifting, probably sitting up. You're sure? I saw messages, I said, my voice tight. They weren't explicit, but they were enough. I need to know for sure, Zach. Can you help me? Of course. he said without hesitation. Tell me everything. I recounted what I'd found, every detail I could remember, from the messages to Amanda's behavior over the past few weeks. Zach listened without interrupting, his occasional hums of acknowledgement the only indication he was still there. All right, he said when I finished. I'll take a look. If she's meeting this guy, I'll find out. Give me a day or two. The relief I felt at his agreement was fleeting, quickly replaced by a heavy sense of dread. Whatever he found, I knew it wouldn't be good. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Amanda came home in the evening, cheerful and affectionate, as though nothing was amiss. She asked me about my day, and I lied, saying it was fine. My stomach churned as she kissed my cheek, her carefree demeanor a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Friday arrived, and with it, the moment I'd been dreading. Zach called me just after noon. I've got something, he said, his voice serious. What is it? I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. They met this morning, he said, at a hotel downtown. The Kingman. It's a luxury place, top-tier everything. The room they're in costs over $500 a night. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The Kingman was one of the most expensive hotels in the city, a place we'd only ever talked about going to for a special anniversary or celebration. And now she was there with him. I got pictures, Zach continued, his tone steady but not unsympathetic. Her and the guy Nate, I assume. I can send them to you if you want. I closed my eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Yeah, send them. Moments later, my phone buzzed. I opened the images Zach had sent, and there it was. Amanda, stepping out of a car in a sleek dress I hadn't seen before. Nate was with her, tall and clean-cut, his hand on the small of her back as they walked into the hotel together. Another image showed them in the lobby, standing close, their heads tilted toward each other in conversation. Amanda was smiling, that wide, radiant smile I used to think was meant only for me. I stared at the photos for what felt like hours, my chest tight with anger and heartbreak. There was no denying it now, no room for excuses or explanations. Amanda was betraying me, and she didn't even seem to care if I found out. Friday night felt like a countdown to a bomb I didn't want to set off but knew I had to. I spent the hours leading up to Amanda's return preparing for the confrontation. My mind raced with every possible outcome, every excuse she might give, every way I might lose my temper. But I couldn't afford to explode. Not yet. I needed to keep my cool, let her lie to my face one more time, and watch it all unravel. When she walked through the door, it was as though nothing had happened. She slipped off her shoes by the door, set her purse on the counter, and greeted me with a cheery, "Hey, babe." Her hair was styled, her makeup still perfect, and she wore the same dress I'd seen in the photos Zach had sent me earlier. It made my stomach churn, but I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a smile. "Hey," I replied, glancing up from the dining table where I was setting out plates. "Dinner's almost ready." She raised an eyebrow, a little surprised. "You cooked?" "Yeah," I said, casually placing a bottle of wine on the table. "Figured we could use a nice meal." She smiled, the kind of smile I'd once found disarming but now saw as calculated. "That's sweet of you. It's been such a long day at work." Work. The word hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I nodded and gestured for her to sit. "Go ahead. It's all ready." She took her seat, pouring herself a glass of wine as I served the food. For a moment, we ate in silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound between us. I watched her, every movement, every expression, looking for cracks in her facade. "So," I said finally, setting down my fork, "how's Nate?" Her reaction was instantaneous. A flash of shock that crossed her face like lightning before she quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. "Nate?" she said, feigning confusion. "Why are you asking about him?" I leaned back in my chair, swirling the wine in my glass. "I don't know. You've mentioned him a lot lately. I figured you two must be pretty close, given how much time you spend together." She blinked, her smile faltering. "Well, I mean, we work together. That's all." He's part of the team, you know? Right? I said, nodding slowly. Just part of the team. She hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. Why are you asking about him all of a sudden? I shrugged, keeping my tone light. No reason. Just curious. The tension in the room was palpable now, thick enough to cut with a knife. Amanda shifted in her seat, her gaze darting to her wine glass as she took a long sip. Anyway, she said, her voice a touch too bright, how was your day? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Oh, it was fine. Just the usual. She nodded, clearly eager to change the subject. But I wasn't done. You know, I said, leaning forward, I ran into Zach today. Her head snapped up, her expression wary. Zach? Your college friend? The private investigator. That's the one, I said, watching her carefully. We had an interesting chat. Amanda's hand tightened around her wine glass, her knuckles whitening. Oh? What about? Just catching up, I said casually. He mentioned something about a case he's working on. Said he was following a couple downtown. Some hotel. Fancy place. The Kingman, I think. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she forced another laugh. That's random. Why are you telling me this? I set my glass down, the sound sharp against the wood of the table. Because Amanda, I said, my voice low and steady. He sent me pictures. Pictures of you. Her face drained of color, the forced smile vanishing entirely. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the images Zach had sent me. I slid the phone across the table, the screen facing her. Care to explain this? Amanda stared at the photos, her breath hitching. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the phone back toward me. It's not what it looks like, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Then tell me, I said, my tone sharp. What does it look like? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been sneaking around with Nate behind my back. She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with panic. It's not, he's just a friend. We were. Don't, I interrupted, my voice rising. Don't you dare insult my intelligence by calling this friendship. I saw the messages. Amanda. Last night was amazing? Can't wait for Friday? What the hell is that? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they did nothing to soften my anger. Nate, please. It didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice shaking with fury. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, spending God knows how much on hotel rooms, and you expect me to believe it didn't mean anything? Her tears spilled over, but she didn't respond. The silence was deafening, her guilt written all over her face. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my marriage crumbled. The trust, the love, the life we'd built together. It was all a lie. And as I stared at her across the table, I realized there was no coming back from this. The room felt colder, quieter. Amanda sat across from me, her face pale, her eyes darting between mine and the phone still on the table. The weight of silence between us was crushing, every second stretching into an eternity. I picked up my phone again, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. With a few swipes, I pulled up the photos Zach had sent and turned the screen toward her. These, I said, my voice low but cutting, are from the Kingman. Earlier today. You and Nate. Amanda's eyes widened as she stared at the screen. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking almost ghostly. I flipped through the images one by one, narrating as I went. Here you are, getting out of the car together. Nice dress, by the way. One I've never seen before. My tone was calm, deliberate, each word landing like a hammer. And here you are in the lobby, smiling at him like he's your whole world. And this one, I added, showing her the final photo. This is you walking into the room, his hand on your back. A $500 a night room, Amanda. She blinked rapidly, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Nate! she whispered, her voice cracking. No, I interrupted, raising a hand. Don't even try to explain this away. Amanda looked down at her hands, now clenched tightly in her lap. It's not what it looks like, she said weakly, her voice barely audible. Not what it looks like? I repeated, letting out a hollow laugh. Are you kidding me? I have photos, Amanda. Messages. The lies. The sneaking around. What part of this doesn't look like exactly what it is? Her hands trembled as she finally lifted her gaze to meet mine. Tears were welling in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Panic, guilt, maybe even shame. It wasn't physical, she blurted out. I swear, Nate, it was never physical. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wasn't me? I asked sharply. She flinched, then nodded hesitantly. You've been so busy. Always at work, always distracted. I felt alone. Nate was just someone I could lean on. Someone who understood. Understood, I echoed, my voice devoid of emotion. Understood so well that you had to sneak into a hotel room together? Amanda, do you even hear yourself? She wiped at her tears, shaking her head. It wasn't like that. It wasn't physical, she repeated, as if saying it again would somehow absolve her. I stared at her, the numbness in my chest spreading to every corner of my body. Her words sounded hollow, rehearsed, like she was clinging to a threadbare excuse. It doesn't matter anymore, I said finally, my tone calm, almost detached. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion. What do you mean? I said, leaning back in my chair. I already talked to Nate's wife. Her mouth fell open, her eyes widening in shock. You what? I talked to his wife, I repeated, my voice steady. Sarah. Lovely woman, by the way. She knows everything. She's seen the photos too. Turns out this isn't Nate's first time playing this game. And apparently, Amanda, it isn't yours either. Her jaw quivered as fresh tears spilled over. Nate, please, she said, her voice trembling. I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can. No, I said, cutting her off. We can't. Her face crumpled, her hands reaching across the table as if to bridge the growing chasm between us. Please don't throw this all away. We've built so much together. I love you. I pushed my chair back and stood, her outstretched hands falling limp. If you loved me, I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to my face, over and over, while sneaking off with someone else. Amanda sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I watched her for a moment, a part of me wanting to feel something, anger, sadness, even pity, but I felt nothing. I picked up my phone, slid it into my pocket, and turned toward the door. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice desperate and broken. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Away, I said simply, and then I walked out, leaving her alone in the house we'd built together, in the ruins of the life we were supposed to share. The morning after our confrontation, the house felt unnervingly quiet. Amanda hadn't said much after I walked out the night before. When I returned later, she was asleep, or pretending to be, curled up on her side of the bed, facing away from me. I didn't sleep a wink. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, running through everything I wanted to say, everything I needed to do. By sunrise, I knew what had to happen. When I came downstairs, Amanda was sitting at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee between her hands. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled. She looked up when I entered, her gaze searching mine for any sign of forgiveness. I didn't give her one. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. She nodded slowly, setting her mug down. I know, she whispered. I sat across from her, the same spot where I'd confronted her with the photos. The memory of that moment replayed in my mind, a sharp reminder of everything that had led us here. I can't do this anymore, I said, cutting straight to the point. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at me, her eyes wide, and for a moment, I thought she might try to argue. I'm filing for divorce, I continued. You need to pack your things and leave. That broke her silence. Nate, please, she said, her voice cracking. We can fix this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away over one mistake. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. One mistake? Amanda, this wasn't one mistake. It wasn't a single lapse in judgment. You lied to me repeatedly. You betrayed me, and worse, you mocked me. This wasn't an accident, it was a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. Her tears started then, spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head. It wasn't like that, she sobbed. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice sharp. And now I can't trust you. I don't even know who you are anymore. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, the gesture only deepening the chasm between us. Please, Nate, she begged, her voice desperate. We can go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. There's no us anymore, I said, my tone colder than I'd ever thought myself capable of. You ended that the moment you started sneaking around with Nate. Therapy won't fix this. Your words don't mean anything to me anymore. Her sobs grew louder, but I sat there, unmoved. I had no more sympathy left to give, no more energy to pour into a marriage she had already shattered. I'll give you some time to pack, I said finally, standing from the table. Her head snapped up, her expression a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. You're really making me leave? Yes, I said firmly. This is my house. You made your choices, Amanda. Now you have to live with them. She didn't respond, just stared at me, tears streaming down her face. I turned and walked away, leaving her to process the reality of what I'd just said. 20 minutes later, I heard the sound of her suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor. I stayed in the living room, staring out the window, as she moved around the house one last time. When she finally walked toward the front door, she paused for a moment, as if she was waiting for me to stop her, to say something, anything, that might change what was happening. But I stayed silent, my eyes fixed on the trees outside. Without a word, Amanda opened the door and stepped out, her suitcase trailing behind her. She didn't look back. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I let out a long, shaky breath. The house was eerily quiet now, empty in a way it hadn't been before. For the first time in years, I was alone. But at least now I wasn't living in a lie. The weeks following Amanda's departure were surreal. For the first time in years, I was alone in the house, a silence filling the rooms that once echoed with conversations, laughter, and arguments. It was unnerving at first, waking up to an empty bed and coming home to no one waiting for me. But as the days passed, that silence began to feel less like a void and more like a blank slate, a chance to start fresh. I threw myself into training again, pouring all my energy into the gym. It became a sanctuary, a place where I could focus solely on myself. Each rep, each drop of sweat felt like a small step toward reclaiming the parts of myself I'd lost over the years. Outside the gym, I started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned long ago. Photography had always been a passion of mine, but between work and the demands of my marriage, it had fallen by the wayside. Now, I dusted off my old camera and started exploring again, capturing sunrises, cityscapes, and candid moments that reminded me of the beauty in everyday life. Even cooking, something Amanda had always taken over, became a new source of joy. I started experimenting in the kitchen, trying recipes I'd always wanted to make but never had the chance to. Each meal I prepared felt like an act of self-care, a small reminder that I didn't need anyone else to make me feel whole. Despite my progress, the scars Amanda had left behind weren't so easily erased. Zach called me about a month after everything went down, his voice steady but tinged with something that felt like pity. "I've been digging deeper," he said. "There's something you should know." I braced myself, already dreading whatever revelation was about to follow. "It wasn't just Nate," Zach continued. "Amanda's been Well, she's been unfaithful for a long time. There were others. A few years back, there was a guy named Mark. Before that, someone named Dylan. And there are gaps in her timeline that suggest there might have been more. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they didn't knock me down the way they might have weeks ago. Instead, they filled me with a strange sense of clarity. So this wasn't new, I said, my voice steady. No, Zach confirmed. It wasn't. I thanked him for telling me, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, letting the weight of his words settle over me. Amanda's betrayal hadn't been a single tragic mistake. It was a pattern, a choice she'd made repeatedly over the years. It made everything I'd felt, every doubt, every suspicion, feel justified. It also solidified my resolve to never look back. She'd destroyed any chance of reconciliation long before I'd even known something was wrong. With that knowledge, I felt a strange kind of freedom. There was no more room for regret or second-guessing. Amanda had shown me exactly who she was, and now it was up to me to decide what kind of life I wanted to build moving forward. So I kept living for myself. I filled my days with things that brought me joy, whether it was an early morning run, a challenging recipe, or a long walk with my camera slung over my shoulder. I reconnected with old friends, went to events I'd always declined before, and slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. The house, once a reminder of everything I'd lost, started to feel like a home that belonged to me alone. Each empty room became an opportunity, a canvas for a new beginning. Amanda's shadow no longer loomed over me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe.